This is episode 263 of the Minute to Track podcast, and we're going to talk about decision paralysis in leadership. Here are the two questions this podcast answers. One, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And two, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Minute to Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. Welcome to this episode of the Minute to Track podcast. I want to welcome back all of you who are frequent listeners, who are subscribed to the podcast, who leave reviews and keep tuning in. It means a lot. If you are listening to this, also know that we have a YouTube channel where you can watch it. And we, of course, love comments and subscriptions on any of those platforms. Welcome also to you if you're a brand new listener. This podcast is really designed to help you lead better and lead more effectively. Now, today I want to talk about imposter syndrome and specifically how that shows up in the decision-making process. The reason why I want to talk about this today is because we've just updated the video course on navigating the imposter syndrome and leading with greater confidence. This is an on-demand video course with short, concise, but really important lessons. If you're dealing with imposter syndrome or you have self-doubt and you realize that your confidence is getting in the way of you showing up as your best self and in how you present yourself and how you lead, understanding where it's coming from and how you can navigate and manage it is really important. In addition to just the leadership competencies in itself, building, continuously growing, and protecting your confidence, I want to say it's just as important as any other skills in the leadership arena. I know that we don't often talk about it in that leadership development space, but this is so crucially important. And in this lesson today, I want to hone in on sort of one part of that, and that is the decision-making aspect. So I hope that you find this valuable, but know that if you want to go deeper and this resonates, check the show notes for our course on this. It's a nominal $19, but it allows you to go way deeper than what we're able to cover in the podcast today. Okay, let's dive in. And I know this is going to resonate with so many of you because that moment when imposter syndrome collides with decision making is so familiar to many, many leaders. It's that sort of paralyzing feeling when you need to make a call and you know it, but the voice in your head keeps saying, oh my gosh, who am I to make the decision? Why am I in charge of this? What if everyone realizes I don't know what I'm doing? I have not enough information at hand. I've never done this before. I'm not ready to make this call, but yet you know there's no one else who's going to make it. This is going to be on you. Now, if any of that resonates, know that you're by far not alone. And in fact, if you find yourselves in these situations where you don't feel ready yet, you're probably pushing yourself in a healthy way, unless you totally feel like you bit off more than you can chew. But in most cases, it is that growth that we are aiming for that then also leads this internal feeling of us feeling ready or being ready still has to catch up. In fact, when we look at research, about 70% of adults say that they have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. That is huge. That means nothing's wrong with you if you feel this way. It is literally just your responsibility, your role on the outside is further ahead than where your internal compass is, your internal sort of self-worth. Now, for some of us, this is a quick thing to catch up to. We get the promotion, we feel a little off in the beginning, but within a few weeks or maybe months, we're caught up and we feel ready and confident in that role. Now, for others, this is a bigger journey and often can be a lifelong journey where we always feel like, this is not because of my experience. It's not because I'm really good at this. This is, luck. I just fell into it, or other people are doing most of the work, or I'm actually just pretending as if I knew, but I don't know truly, and they may find out. And these internal doubts can accompany us throughout many, many stages of our careers. So it depends on where you fall on this sort of scale or on this dimension, but most people have experienced this gap that I was just alluding to. And so with that, I want to highlight that the problem is not that you have it. This is why we don't necessarily need to sort of overcome imposter syndrome. I actually really prefer to talk about it as to how do we manage and navigate imposter syndrome so that you learn what to do in those moments when you feel not ready yet, when you doubt yourself. And today, again, we're going to talk about what that looks like when you need to make a decision. So first, before we go into the details, let's quickly connect the dots. Why does imposter syndrome hit our decision-making ability so hard? When you're feeling like an imposter, like a fraud or not ready yet, every decision becomes a potential moment of exposure. It's literally like us thinking this could be the decision that reveals that I don't belong here, that I don't know what I'm doing. And that fear then creates the perfect storm for decision paralysis. What's fascinating is what happens in your brain during this experience. So the amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection, kicks in when you're in imposter mode. It essentially starts to activate, and when it activates a lot, so in more intense cases, it actually totally can hijack your prefrontal cortex, which is where the executive function and decision making actually happens. So our rational, logical part of our brain, or our ability to do that, gets hijacked by the amygdala, because the amygdala now is back here. It's almost like it's holding it all in because it's trying to regulate the emotional component, that fear that exists. Now, sometimes this is pretty obvious. Like you've probably been in a situation where you were really scared. And you can tell, like, oh my gosh, I totally stopped thinking. I just went into autopilot and I ran. Or you were in a situation where you got really emotional and you couldn't control yourself, even though intellectually you knew what you were about to do was probably not the smartest thing, but you were kind of just acting based on this emotion. And this is where the amygdala is in your head now taking charge. But it can also be fairly subtle, where we almost feel like we don't notice it. And in fact, where the amygdala is so sneaky that it makes you feel as if you're logically thinking about this, and you actually think, for example, I don't have enough information to make a call, and you intellectually convince yourself that that is the reason why you're hesitating. But the true fact is, no, this is your amygdala trying to protect yourself, the fear trying to protect you from being sort of found out in those situations or making a mistake that then could really hurt, or you internally would interpret that as hurting your self-worth. So what happens is that your biology, your survival instinct is working against you. But here's what really matters. This isn't just a personal struggle, right? This isn't just something that we have to sort of figure out through our personal journey. When leaders delay decisions because of this imposter feeling, because of the amygdala kicking in, the entire team, or maybe even the organization, suffers and is impacted by this. One study I was looking at found that decision delays at the leadership level can cost organizations up to 7% of their annual revenue. Think about that. And you probably hear the statistic and you're not even that surprised, is my guess. I wasn't that surprised because I've most definitely witnessed this over and over again, where I knew we needed to make a decision, but it was too many chefs in the kitchen. It was just delayed and delayed. And after the fact, you would see, oh gosh, this is how much it costs us because we should have taken an action earlier. So your personal battle with imposter syndrome can directly impact your team's success. That's something that's really important to recognize. So you investing in yourself to get better at decision making and at navigating and managing your imposter syndrome isn't just an ROI for you personally. This has an ROI for the organization and for the team. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to get a little bit more specific about what this looks like in leadership situations. Consider which of those patterns sound familiar. First, there's the perfection trap. This is when you keep refining a decision past the point of diminishing returns, because perfect feels a lot safer than good enough. So this is I just need to review this proposal one more time. I just need to practice this one more time. I just need to make a small tweak in how you, my direct report, wrote it. It's not quite perfect, so I'm going to edit your work. That is sort of that perfectionist tendency. And then there is what we call the over-research syndrome. You keep gathering more and more data, telling yourself it's due diligence. But it's really about avoiding the moment of decision. It's the let me just check one more source excuse. And this is where it gets sneaky. Sometimes that is absolutely fair and absolutely the right thing to do, which is why it's sneaky. It's because in those moments when it's the imposter syndrome, the fear that's kicking in, the thought, I just have to check one more source, seems so rational and so reasonable that we don't realize that the only reason why we do this and why we feel this way is really because of our fear of making a wrong decision. But what we then often realize is even after we've checked that one source, we still feel like we need to check more sources. That often didn't change the way we feel about the decision. And that would be the signal. The reason why you had to check this additional source or run it by someone was only because of your internal fears and concerns, not because of the logic and the rational aspect. Now, another common pattern is the diffusion of responsibility. And that is, in essence, the excessive consensus seeking when what's really needed is your decision. It can look like scheduling yet another meeting when you already know what needs to be done. This could be even when you have an underperformer on the team that you know you're going to have to let go. But you're going to try again and try again and try again and have another feedback conversation and let it slide and turn yet another blind eye, hoping it would change, or hoping that at some point it would be so obvious to everyone, including that person, that this isn't working out. So you wait until it's so blatantly clear to everyone involved that this person needs to leave, including the person themselves. But that is typically way too late. And that's where the cost that we talked about earlier kicks in, because after the fact, you probably know, I should have made that decision months ago. Another point here to consider is the risk calibration. And that's when normal business risks can suddenly start to feel really catastrophic through that lens of imposter syndrome. So when there is a 20% chance of failure, you then maybe start to think that it's an 80% chance to fail. Your imposter brain in that moment will catastrophize the situation. Another symptom that I often notice in leaders is when they have a bit of an approval addiction. And maybe addiction isn't the right word, but it's this excessive need for validation before deciding. It could be that every time you want to make a decision, you kind of are ready for it, but then you have to run it by your manager just so that your manager can say, yep, that sounds right, go ahead. But you already knew it. You were already very sure that that would be the right thing to do, but you don't feel ready to move into action unless someone else, and usually it's a manager, has given you the go ahead. It can also be that you have this feeling with your team that your team just needs to keep validating you before you can make a decision. And that dependency isn't going to help your executive presence, by the way. It's not going to help how you appear as a leader, and it's going to slow you down in your performance. Yet another symptom here, and I hope by now you can already check the box of like, yeah, okay, I've seen this before, I can relate to this, or maybe I see this in some of my team members or coworkers. These are all symptoms of imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean that when you observe them that they're always tied to imposter syndrome, but they're signals that there may be something underneath going on. So one of those other ones that the last one I want to call out is the sort of the time frame distortion. Imposter syndrome can make everything seem very urgent. And it's as if it can't wait. Just interesting. I was trying to buy a stock this morning, and I was unsure of whether or not I should invest in this particular industry. And so I was doing some research, and I could tell the research still didn't fully convince me, or didn't give me a good indication. And I really started to doubt myself on whether or not I know what I'm doing. And in that moment, I thought, well, I gotta make a decision. I just gotta buy it now. And I had to like talk myself out of it to think, hold on a second, whether I buy this stock today or in a week, I'm not a day trader, so that's not going to make a difference. My goal is not to optimize within a week time frame my portfolio. And so I had to like really walk back and think, just because you feel like you're unsure today doesn't mean this is so urgent. And it's almost a little backwards, where we think, well, if you feel doubtful, wouldn't you want to delay the decision? Yes, sometimes, but it can actually also show up with this sense of urgency that's totally made up. And maybe you can relate to this personal example I just shared in how that may show up for you, whether it is about your financial decisions or anything else in your life. So I encourage you to take a moment to think about what I just shared and which ones resonated with you, because the awareness is really the first step in getting better with your decision-making frameworks and approaches when imposter syndrome is at play. Now, with all that said, let's get a little bit more tactical. I'm going to talk about a framework that includes multiple aspects of decision-making. I'm going to use the acronym DECIDE, or the DECIDE method here, to share this information. Now, granted, this isn't theory, and just because I call it a method and it has an acronym, shouldn't be all theoretical. This is really practical stuff. And so take some note or think through a particular example where you have to make a decision right now to bring this to life and to really use what I'm going to share in your day-to-day work. So D stands for define the real decision that's required. Often, imposter syndrome creates decision fog in a way where we make everything seem complicated. And you've probably seen this in others more so that you might notice it in yourself. There are people, I call them the complexifiers versus the simplifiers. There's some people who make every decision super complicated. Be this which restaurant we're going to go to, what does the party look like, to how are we going to implement a new product or launch a new product feature. When you notice that, it's almost like scope creep in the decision-making process, where you start to look at all these different dependencies and it's starting to feel like a fog. That is when you want to get crystal clear. What's the one decision that will help me cut through all of this? So almost like what you have to write down is the one decision I actually need to make is ... And force yourself to complete that sentence in under 15 words. You might be amazed at how this clarifies your thinking. By the way, if you're helping your direct reports make a decision and they go into this decision fog, this could be a really good question to ask them. What's the one decision you actually need to make? Okay. DE, so decision. E is for establish your decision criteria beforehand. Before you gather information, decide what matters. If you look at sort of 3 columns on a piece of paper, on the left, there might be the must-haves. What is absolutely important to consider in this decision? It could be a cost, a timeline, headcount, or FTEs. It could be sort of other requirements, client needs, and so forth that go into that must-have. Then are the nice to haves. Well, it'd be nice if, this could be done. It'd be nice if we could keep the cost in-house, nice to haves. And then all the non-factors, all the things that come up in conversations by you, with your team, or from stakeholders that actually are sort of like accessories to the decision, but not actual factors that should be taken into account for the decision. Put them in the most right column. The reason why is because imposter syndrome will keep moving the goalpost if you don't start that firmly at the beginning and you don't define what are the must-haves versus what are the nice-to-haves. In your effort to make sure you're not failing and not making a wrong decision, you're likely going to try to aim to meet all the must-haves and all the nice-to-haves, which can be really difficult. In the construction industry, or let's say when you build a house, they always say, there is speed, there's quality, and there's cost. You can have 2 out of the 3, but you can't have all 3. So if I go for speed and cost, then quality is a nice to have. It's no longer a must have. And so for you to get really clear on what are must-have and nice-to-haves will help you be stronger in the decision-making process, and the fear that's going to drive you to want to accomplish all things can be managed. Okay, now we're moving on to the letter C in decide, and C stands for calibrate the decision importance. Ask yourself, is this easily reversible if wrong? I've talked about this on the podcast before. Jeff Bezos calls these type 1 and type 2 decisions. Type 2 decisions are reversible. You can make them quickly. You can go door in and door back out. So it calls them sort of like the 2-door decisions. Type 1 decisions are hard to undo. So you walk through that door, it's kind of hard to go back. So let's say you are in a small company or in a startup, and the moment that you decide to take money from outside investors, that's something that's kind of hard to undo, right? That's a type 1 decision or a 1-door decision. For those type of decisions, you want to take your time. So procrastinate is actually a good thing. But most decisions that leaders agonize over are actually type 2 decisions. And that is where it gets tricky. So calibrate, is this a type 1 or a type 2 decision? And if it goes wrong and I make the wrong decision, what would be the back door? What would it look like to undo this? And having a plan B in place or knowing how to reverse it can often sort of eliminate some of that fear that you might have of doing it wrong. Okay, then I is for isolate the fear from the facts. So a way to do this is to draw a line down the middle of a page. And on one side, you write what my fear tells me. And on the other side, you write down what the evidence shows. So all the evidence, and evidence needs to be factual, like you can prove it in court, not interpretations, facts. So facts on the right, what the fear tells you, what you're worried about on the left. And when you do this, you'll immediately see how imposter syndrome distorts your reality, how you're confusing the two in your head. Happens all the time. This is something that's really interesting in coaching conversations. When someone tells me about a problem and I can tell that this is totally entangled, and the first thing we do is to remove the facts or separate the facts from the interpretations and the thoughts or the fears. And once we do that, suddenly to clients, what their decision becomes so clear and so obvious. They immediately know what to do. Okay, so now moving on to the letter D in decide, that second D, and that is the deadlines that drive actions. Is it an artificial deadline that you need to impose in order to ensure that you're not procrastinating? This is often referred to as time boxing based on importance. So for example, if you have to make a minor operational decision, allocate 15 minutes to it. Like go through the documents, go through the resources, and after 15 minutes, make that decision. You're internally ahead of time saying like, how much should I allocate to this? Now, a team structure decision may take a lot more time. You might say like, I have to have multiple meetings. I need to have conversations with multiple people. I need to really think through this strategically. I'm going to give this 2 weeks in total, and probably it's going to take about 5 hours of my time. Now, a strategic direction may even take months and weeks and actual hours to research, to discuss before you're then ready to make a decision. But having a timeline associated with it will help you not procrastinate. So this is another tool just to keep in mind. Speaking of timeline, something that I sometimes do with clients is if they are ruminating over something that's actually not urgent, it's not something that they need to decide on now, it's maybe something that they'll need to decide on in a few months. What I will do to get them out of this fog is to agree with them a date that we call the D-Day, the decision day. And there's also a time that it's almost like we're saying, do not think about this for the next 4 weeks. You're almost not allowed to make a decision for the next 4 weeks. I don't even want you to think about. I don't even think you should think about this decision for another 4 weeks. And then at that point, when you're closer to the D-date, that's when you pick it back up. Because what will happen in the meantime is you'll be able to collect information, data points, without you constantly ruminating over it in your head. Okay, so that all falls within that D section of setting deadlines. Now, finally, let's talk about the E at the end, and that stands for engage your leadership identity. And it's a bit of a stretch, I get it here, but stick with me. So before you make a decision where you notice, hey, imposter syndrome is sort of part of the journey here, create a past success inventory. And this could be listing previous successful decisions you've made that demonstrate your leadership capacity, or reminding yourself of how much experience and expertise that you already have and bring into this decision-making process. So review this inventory and this list before making major decisions to really anchor yourself in your competence and not in imposter feelings. So engage your past, engage your leadership in the process. And so that was the acronym DECIDE that covered the different aspects of decision making. And I want to share a practical example about this. I recently worked with someone in the tech field. Let's call this person Sarah. Sarah was paralyzed about a reorg decision. So she had to restructure her team, and she knew it. In fact, the CEO gave the mandate to cut employee count, so to cut headcount, and to make restructurings. And she was delaying that decision quite a bit. And she knew that the imposter syndrome, her worry about like not knowing what she was doing, making the wrong mistakes and regretting it, was getting in the way. So she used the DECIDE framework to think through the different aspects. She first defined the real decision. How do I align my team structure with our new product focus? That was the biggest decision. It wasn't, am I good enough to reorg my team? And what if I make a mistake? No, we really honed in on that big question that she needed to answer. Everything else was noise. She then established criteria, must-haves, including a minimal disruption to key project. And she then added nice-to-haves, including keeping her high performers engaged and motivated, despite having to let some people go. She also calibrated this as a type 2 decision. So if it didn't work, she could just adjust it in 3 months. Yes, she couldn't rehire people she had to let go in the process, but the reorg in itself, she could fine tune. She could still make changes. This could be reversed if it didn't work out. Then the isolate, the I step was crucial for her. So it was really important for her. The fear told her, everyone will quit if I change their roles. They're not going to like their jobs anymore. Morale will go downhill. Everyone will blame me. I'm going to look bad as a leader. And the list went on. But what the evidence showed was that her team had actually specifically asked for clear structure. They had pointed out inefficiencies and misalignments. Some of them even mentioned that there are some underperformers on the team and that they had to carry their weight. So she knew about these conversations, the evidence of like X person said, ... That was on the evidence side on the paper. Then the deadline technique forced her to announce the reorg within 2 weeks, not 2 months, that her imposter syndrome wanted to delay this forever long. But she gave herself 2 weeks. They had an event coming up in 2 weeks. She knew that would be a good, convenient time to also talk about the reorg and make announcements then. And finally, before communicating any changes and sort of as a check-in for herself, she reviewed her past successes, the times that she had learned about reorgs, that she had made team decisions such as letting people go. She reminded herself of all those good decisions she's made in the past and looked at what are the common denominators that she could also leverage for this current decision with the reorg. So with all that, she felt really grounded in her capacity to make the decision, but to also then present it and to lead her team through the change. And ultimately, the reorg went through, the team performance actually improved, and Sarah's confidence in making tough calls increased as well. So zooming back out from that example, when you find yourself making imposter-driven decisions, or this analysis paralysis happening, normalize the experience, right? Talk about it with someone that you trust or with a coach. Know that this is not a weakness, but it's part of the leadership journey. And you don't need to feel shameful about this. Now, I would hesitate with talking to your teammates about it, the people that you actually lead. So finding an outside person or just a really trusted relationship here may be best. The reason why that would be a topic for a different podcast episode. Then fine-tune your decision-making approach. Whether this is this decide framework, there are other decision-making tools. There is a lot that goes into sort of deciding how to make decisions. We talk about this in our Executive Presence Intensive program as well, so that you get clearer on how you make decisions. It's an important aspect of elevating into senior leadership and demonstrating strong executive presence. It will ultimately make you appear and be more objective and less vulnerable to this imposter distortion or emotional reactions or the amygdala kicking in. And if you do have a trusted relationship at work or someone that you've worked with in the past, or again, a coach, you can use them as decision partners. So this is about having someone who can help you walk through the decision-making approach and distinguish what are your rational, logical arguments and what are emotions and fears that are kicking in, or doubts, self-doubts, that are sort of tweaking your sense of reality and creating biases. A good question to ask there, ask yourself, ask your direct reports, or have someone ask you, like that I would ask as a coach, is what would you decide if you knew you couldn't fail? Or if either option were to lead to a success, which one do you think is better? So we take the worry about failure out of it, and suddenly things become more clear. And finally, acknowledge your decision making too. When someone on your team makes a tough call, even if it's not perfect, but you see how much effort they put into decision making process, when you go through it and you realize, oh, I'm really honing in on my objective decision making, my rational decision making, acknowledge yourself for the effort, for the process, more so than whether or not the decision ultimately ended in a success or in a failure or was considered right or wrong. Decisions at senior levels are often tough calls. I forget which US president said this, but it was something on the lines of every decision that falls on his desk is a 49-51, 50-50 decision. 49% or 51, it could be right or wrong or good or bad in an outcome. The higher up that you go, the more you're going to make decisions that are risky, that you have incomplete information, and you have to make these tough calls. You don't know yet if it's going to work out the way that you intend. There are a lot of variables that you can't foresee, and you don't have the information at hand when you need to make a decision. That is totally normal. So celebrate yourself for the decision process leading up to the call, more so than the actual outcome. You really want to make sure that you're taking the emotion out of it, you're following the right processes, you're having a method and frameworks in mind when you make decisions. And by the way, when you do this, you're going to role model this to your team as well. And you get better at coaching your team and making better decisions too. So all of that will be a win for your leadership, your team, and the org at large. So here's what I hope you take away from this episode. Imposter syndrome isn't just an emotional experience. It is a decision-making inhibitor with real consequences for you and your organization, among other things that are actually really leading to dollar losses. The patterns of decision paralysis are recognizable and can be interrupted once you know what you're looking for. So the decide framework and other decision-making approaches can give you specific actionable techniques to break through this and make more confident and logical decisions, even if you do feel imposter feelings on the inside. It also helps you create organizational structures and cultures that acknowledge the challenge of decision making and normalizes the experience of doubts. So I challenge you this week to identify one decision that you've been avoiding, something that's been overdue, and then apply the decide framework and commit to making that decision within 48 hours. Then notice not just the outcome of that decision, but also how it feels to move past paralysis. And I would love to hear how that goes for you. So leave a comment or send us a direct message on either Instagram or LinkedIn. You'll find all the details in the show notes. And again, if you want to go deeper into imposter syndrome and how to navigate it and lead with greater confidence, Check out the show notes for the link to our course, nominal $19, but we'll go into the details of where it's coming from, how to do it, practical strategies and tactics to help you build up your confidence. And with that, thanks so much for being here and for engaging in this process and investing this time in your own leadership growth. I appreciate you, and we'll be back with another episode next week. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.